Okay, friends, here we are with a man codenamed or possibly actually named Ted. So we have Ted with us today, and he claims to be an activist for conservative values, especially in terms of the Second Amendment and gun rights within California. And why are we talking to Ted today? Not just because he has this unique position, but because he told me something that I found fascinating, that really the media and maybe other sources have created this image that California is this sort of liberal nightmare zone, when in fact California is a lot more diverse as we might have thought. So first off, Ted, I'd like to thank you for being here, and we're going to start with the questions right now. Number one, you've told me that you are pro-gun and an anti-leftist activist in California. Could you tell me just how uphill of a battle this has been, and about the organization itself that you work with?
Yeah, well, it's certainly. Well, first, thanks for having me. Yeah, it's definitely an uphill battle, and there are a number of reasons for that. The organization itself is got chapters across the state, and it's involved in a number of things, including lobbying and including legislation and so forth. So let me just say this: as the reason it's an uphill battle is I would okay, California has definitely got a very left-wing government. There's no two ways around it.
Oh, we've noticed.
Yeah. It might be slightly less extreme than it was prior to 10 years ago. But there's a debate about that, but that really doesn't matter. It's still a challenge. When I say that it's more, I think you said it a very, very good way, Tim. It is more politically diverse than its image has, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Well, maybe there's only one reason, but there's. Do you know the name Rick Grinnell?
No, unfortunately, no.
Okay.
New to me.
Rick Grinnell was the former director of national intelligence under Trump. He's a California guy. So Trump loses in 2020. Rick comes back to California, or at least he becomes active again. He starts an organization called Fix California. And one of the things that they discovered was about 1.5 million unregistered but eligible conservative, unregistered to vote, eligible to vote conservative voters. People are just off the grid. So another thing is when Trump
hold on,
won,
we gotta stop. So wait, so who
Yeah.
are these people, and did they just not vote because they're lazy or don't want to, or what?
So I haven't dug down into their methodology or what they've discovered about them as sort of categories or individuals of people, but I would say for a couple of reasons. One, I think a lot of them are going to be Latinos. Who are not by, well, I'm not Latino, so I'll still say what I believe to be true, and I think this is sort of the common sense, is that Latinos tend to be conservative by culture. Now, and that's maybe because of Catholic heritage or something like that. I don't know. But there's certainly a lot of Latinos in America, when they come here, they came here because they left governments that were really sort of totalitarian leaning, left wing or otherwise. So that might be part of it. But I think another part of it would be, and I think I would say I have a couple of friends of mine in this group. They have a why bother attitude. Why should we bother? Because we're going to lose. Well,
I see. So it's sort of like almost like a self-defeating attitude of, well, we're in California, there's no hope, why bother?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Now, California historically has not been this way. Historically, it was a reliably Republican state. Now, by the way, I'm not at all affiliated with any political party, and I'm not registered with a political party. I vote, I'm active, but I'm a no party preference person. There's a saying that one of our talk show hosts out here says that the Democrats are the cause of all our problems, but the Republicans are not going to solve them all.
That's probably very true. Because I'll tell you one thing, my friend, right now in Russia, as we record this, it's actually before the midterm elections, and a lot of Russian people I know are really excited, like, Tim, if the Republicans come in, maybe they'll cut support for Kiev. I don't know, guys. I don't know if that's exactly going to be the case.
like, if you don't, I'll say my opinion on that is I agree with you. I don't think so, and that's because nobody, but nobody, bucks the military-industrial complex. If you are an inside that Washington D.C. beltway, whether you're a politician or a bureaucrat, a conservative talk show host who's rigidly constitutionalist, it all stops when it comes to war.
Well, yeah, politicians change, foreign policy remains the same. Or a president's change, that's the proper expression.
Yeah.
Presidents change, foreign policy remains the same. Yeah.
Right. And even the political pundits who are hardcore, I don't even like that word, they're just patriot constitutionalists. But when it comes to war, there's a grip over the narrative. Mm-hmm. And you just don't buck that system. So hopefully we, the people, can do that slowly over time with a few different elections, but I don't know.
I kind of want to get back to this thing about the election rigging, because one of my questions for you was that in a private conversation we had, you mentioned that it's your belief that the Golden State is actually, not liberal, and that there are plenty of election rigging action going on. So could you kind of tell us some examples of this? Besides that, we have some people who've been disenfranchised, but being kind of disenfranchised or demotivated through propaganda. Well, that's not a true form of election rigging. That's I don't know, the form of manipulation, basically. So what are some real, like, in your face election rigging that's going on in California?
Sure. Just to sort of as a caveat, I would say California is going to be liberal-ish, right? They're going to lean liberal. They're going to probably vote Democrat more likely than not, even under fair circumstances. But we are, I believe, because of what you just asked me, and I'll get into, I believe we are absolutely not the left-wing nut job populace that is reflected by the people who hold office. Mm-hmm. So here's a couple of things. One, we have a mail-in only voting system. Now, you can deposit your mail-in ballot in person, mm-hmm. but everybody who's registered to vote will, and this is very recent, automatically gets their ballot mailed to them on their address of record. I've got many friends who've left the state, and several of them in other states have received their California ballots.
Oh.
We've got 1.8 million, the last time I checked, registered voters who are not eligible to be registered. They're dead, they're not citizens, they've left, or whatever. 1.8 million. But those ballots get mailed out. I've got other friends who have received multiple ballots. And then here's a personal experience. Last election, my wife and I went to vote. Oh, well, I'll precede this by you'll need it. We don't have voting precincts anymore in California. You don't have your precinct. And for your listeners who may not understand our voting system, you have typically you have a local precinct. It's, there are many of them, and you're on a book, you're registered. And when you go in to vote, there's a book, and the book has your name in it, and they check you off. They did away with those a couple of years ago. So now we have what they call voting centers, and you can go to any voting center and drop off your mail-in ballot. So my wife and I would go to vote. I've pre-completed my ballot. My wife lost hers, so she goes in. I've lost my ballot. What do I do? They said, fill this out. We'll give you a new ballot. So she fills out this little piece of paper, name, address, whatever, hands it over to them. They did not look at it. They did not require an ID. They just gave her a new ballot. You can go to any voting center you want because there are no more precincts. So we could have voted 100 times that day if we wanted to. We did not.
Oh, my goodness.
It's ridiculous. And so I know from a personal experience, I know from what the law now is, and I know from anecdotal evidence from people I know, that it's dreadful. And then I guess the last thing that's worth pointing out is that, when was this? I should know the years, but they say 10 years ago. California, so again, for any of your listeners who are not familiar with our voting system here, we've got, I assume it's the same everywhere, but we've got the main election where the person who wins, they take their position. But prior to that,
take all.
Right. Prior to that, you've got the primary. And the primary is where each political party picks their person who's going to run. So about 10 years ago or so, California changed their primary system, our primary system, mm-hmm. so that the Republicans do not select their candidates, and the Democrats select theirs separately. Instead, it's what's called, I mean, people who don't like it call it a jungle primary. And you just go in and you vote for somebody. And there might be 3 Democrats on there, 12 Republicans, a couple of Libertarians, whatever. And the 2 top vote getters proceed to the general. Now, because of the nature, again, going back to what I said, we do tend to be, there's no way around it, we do tend to be more liberal, but also more registered Democrats. So typically, you will have the top 2 vote getters be Democrats in the general election. And one of the things
what you're saying is they're trying to kind of like flood the race with a lot of candidates all from the same party that maybe have different flavors, so a Democrat wins regardless.
That's the result. Oh. It's funny because Arnold Schwarzenegger was governor when this was he was kind of behind it, and it was pushed by one guy. I can't remember his name, but his vote was, he loved this idea. His vote was needed for a vote that was really important to the powers that be. So he traded his vote for the promise to change our system. What was his name? His name was Maldonado, I think. Anyway, so now because of that machination 10 years ago or whatever, we now have this. And it's not uncommon for the Republicans to have many more candidates in the primary than the Democrats have. And it's also not uncommon for the Democrats to actually back certain Republicans in the primary to dilute the field and make it more likely that the 2 candidates who make it to the general election are Democrats. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I can understand that. Now, the one thing is, so you're saying that, because at first when you started talking about this, I've heard a lot of crazy stuff being related to a certain illness that we can't mention on YouTube. But you're saying this actually goes back to the Schwarzenegger period. That was like, what, 12 years ago, 10, something like that?
I can't remember now when it was. In fact, this week I read a little bit about this because I thought it might come up, and I just can't remember the names
now,
of the years.
Was this voting change? Was this a set of laws? Was it like an amendment to a state constitution?
Yes, that's what it was. And that horse trading that happened that I mentioned, that was in order to get onto the ballot a constitutional amendment to the state constitution requiring the primaries to be run in this way. Now, of course, it doesn't apply to the presidency, but it does, and there's a couple of other offices it does not apply to. But for state office, most state offices for the Senate, etc.
And how was this sold to the public, or just wasn't just discussed? It was just sort of pushed through, and that's it.
Well, it's absolutely discussed. I was not a resident, but I have pretty steep roots in the state, so I was paying attention. I'm just politically, interested anyway, so I was paying attention to what was going on, and there were a great deal of discussion. And because it was a constitutional amendment in California, the people have to approve these amendments, and so it was put on as a ballot measure, and it was approved by the people. So it wasn't, this wasn't something that was sort of done behind closed doors in the middle of the night. We woke up and everything was different. But to what extent voters are actually really informed is a question I don't know. It probably sounded good to people, but the result was it just continued to further the sort of the grip on the levers of power and control in state politics. And of course, all this is related to my earlier caveat, which is California does tend to be more liberal now than it does to be conservative. But I absolutely believe that we're, as a people, as a populace of the state, we are not what is reflected by our policies or our laws.
Well, that's a pretty big, bold claim. I just wanted to say before we get to that claim that, as a guy who's from Ohio and, is left Ohio a long time ago, I try to be pretty up to date on things. There are definitely people who are more dedicated and maybe astute, as it were, to following the news. But I have to be honest, what you're telling me, this is the absolute, and I'm sure of it. I know my memory can fail me at sometimes, but this is the absolute first time I've ever heard of this. That whatever was done to you guys, it was done so quietly that it didn't make it to Ohio. I guess it didn't make it to the international news. This is kind of unbelievable here, man.
You mean with the
I'm at a
Constitution?
loss. I'm not shocked in the sense that that's something that's despicable. Despicable things happen all the time. I'm just shocked I've never heard of this.
Yeah. It's strange. And actually, Alaska just this year adopted something similar. Washington State had what California has before California did. Nebraska has something similar too.
That's extremely depressing. But anyways, so your kind of claim that you just made that I said I'd comment on is that, okay, well, you say that, the picture of California is not as it seems. But you know what? I've heard many times from a Moscow Russian liberal that we here are the power, that it's actually us Moscow liberals who should be in charge of all of Russia because Putin bad. So are you just kind of falling on the train of just saying whoever cries that we're the people and we represent the will of the people the loudest gets their way? Is there any way that you can sort of prove that the actual majority of Californians have a different sort of philosophy about life and politics?
Well, I couldn't prove it for sure. I wouldn't even say if I could, I wouldn't expect it to be a majority. I just, my position is, and I'm certainly not alone, because, I'm active just generally in life and politically a little bit here and there. So I know how other people think too. And I would say all of us, for example, friends and colleagues, et cetera, who voted for Donald Trump in 2020, were convinced that he won this state. I mean, we would be laughed out of any, gathering of normal people, but we're convinced. And it's so, you kind of go by your gut. It could be just wishful thinking. I mean, human beings are human beings, right? We could just be saying, oh, well, it's what I want. But I don't know if you were familiar with there were the Trump, he had his rallies. But then we had our boat parades, we had our car parades, we had so they were massive here, massive. And I was seeing Trump shirts and Trump hats in where I live, in town, in the stores. And this is my where I live tends to vote Democrat. People it was everywhere. There were, even through Los Angeles, there were these huge, not parade. What's the word? Everybody gets in their car and they.
Oh, you mean like some sort of oh gosh, what is that called? I know what it is in Russian. Автопробег. What is it in English? It is like some sort of, I don't know, automotive rally of support or something. I don't know.
Right, but everybody gets in their car and they just drive around with their Trump flags. They honk their horns. And stuff. These happened frequently. They were massive. I myself was involved in a boat rally or whatever, boat parade, and so it was here. And another thing I would point out is that when prior to Newsom, the governor was Jerry Brown. When Jerry Brown was last elected, he got a little over 4 million votes, I think. Whatever his number was, when Trump ran against Hillary Clinton in 2016, Trump got more votes for him, even though he lost, than Jerry Brown got when he won.
Interesting.
Now, that doesn't mean, again, I'll say this. I'm not saying that we're a majority Republican state. We're certainly not. You can see the numbers, even if you back out that 1.8 million registered voters who aren't supposed to be registered. But what we're talking about here is if you could get these 1.5 or 1.4 million conservatives who are eligible to vote, who aren't even registered to get involved, if you could activate these people and get out the vote, then it's possible. I mean, Rick Grinnell started this organization. By the way, I don't know him. I'm not pushing this. I mentioned him 3 times now. It's just to me, it's hopeful. He wouldn't have done this, I think, unless he thought there was a reason for it. There's other things he could do to make money or to keep himself in the headlines than this. So some of this is assumption. You assume people are acting in a way that makes sense. But it's also my own personal experience that it's not a totally leftist state like it seems to be. Here's our Achilles heel, though. My wife and I counted. Um, in the past 5 years, we have lost over 30 friends and colleagues to other states. This is two people who know
Oh.
30 people.
Well,
And
here's one
now,
thing. 30 friends, as in, is it 30 people you've heard of or 30 people that you'd regularly talk to? You know what
these
I
are
mean?
people we know. These are actual personal friends,
Okay.
colleagues, clients, and I know businesses that have left,
Yeah.
and I'm involved with businesses, and I've seen these people migrate, and they go to
Now,
the usual suspects.
this begs the question because sort of the mainstream media, well, they don't talk about this too much, but let's just say Fox. Fox is mainstream media. They will talk about this. They would say that really the core thing is the taxation. So was it that your friends are just taxed into oblivion and so they left? But to be honest, I think people could tolerate a lot of really bad taxes before they give up living in a place that they like. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So what was their motivations, or at least the motivations they told you about? Who knows what was happening in their subconscious, you know?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and there's different reasons for different people. So, one friend moved his family, for example, to Tennessee, and that was because he could make he could make a boatload more money in Tennessee doing what he does than he could here. He went there. He left here where he could not afford. And he was a Los Angeles guy. He could not afford to buy a house. He's got a wife. He's got a baby. He's got another kid on the way. Couldn't afford to buy a house. Moves to Tennessee, and he's got this beautiful, like 2,500 square foot home on an acre, and he lives with normal people. So like the people that you grew up with in Ohio, like that kind of like stuff. So that's one. Another one is definitely taxes. Businesses are moving for taxes. It's really brutal. Another buddy, he moves his family. He had two young girls. Moves his family to Texas because he did not want them to grow up somewhere where they could not be, where it would be hard to be proud to be part of America. He did not want to. He was also.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that's setting the bar real low.
Well, it is, but again, these people are kind of like me, so I consider myself to be a patriot and an American, but I think our government is, and just like my friends that I'm talking about or my colleagues, we think the government's out of control. We're absolutely not in favor of the almost all of the policies of the government, and that has nothing to do with Democrat. Most of us view the two parties as two sides of a uniparty coin. So when I say they want to be proud of America, we're talking about the America that, was worth being proud of at one point. We hope can be fixed and somehow come back, which may or may not be possible. He also didn't want this particular guy. He didn't want his kids educated in the LA school systems. Now, that's a real problem. That the school systems are really bad. So anyway,
I'm from the inner city, man. I know. I know.
Okay,
how it
so
goes.
yeah. Now, California schools used to be the best in the country. When I was growing up here, I grew up in California, and my schools were great. It was, I'm a little older than my friends who are leaving, but and then so other friends are leaving because of gun rights. Now, California is not as bad as other states. You can still get almost anything here that you can get in another state, but it's getting worse and worse. And California is the legislature is really clever about enacting laws that will make it difficult to exercise your right under the Constitution to keep and bear arms. And it's not just blatant gun laws; it's laws that you wouldn't expect. Like, it's in a couple of years, I think it's going to be illegal to breed certain hunting dog breeds. Why do you do that? Because in California, if you go bird hunting, it's a felony if you don't retrieve your bird. But if you can't have that dog because it's illegal to breed them here, you can't retrieve. So you're not going to hunt. So
these are laws made by people who've never done that because, sometimes you actually can't retrieve the bird. It just doesn't kind of work out that way.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Unbelievable.
So it's clever. There's a lot of cleverness. So people are leaving for different reasons. So gun rights, crime is one of them. There's no way around it. I mean, Los Angeles has become, it's really despicable. San Francisco, it's terrible. The homeless camps are everywhere, and they bleed over into the surrounding counties. And
just to be clear, now in Russia, those scenes of those homeless camps from different videos, it's very shocking in Russia, and I'll put it this way, it evokes a lot of emotion online. So to what extent is there like one sort of area, like some sort of Skid Row? Are you talking about in like every urban center within California, there's just homeless people and drug addicts everywhere? Like, what does this actually look like?
So I wouldn't say everywhere, but there are areas where it is really bad, and it certainly feels like it's everywhere. It's almost all consuming. It feels a lot of things. Like if you're driving through an area, let's say you're going to, my closest airport is Los Angeles Airport. If you're driving to the airport, you get this feeling in your gut when you're driving through these areas. You feel terrible for these people because they're human beings. In part, you feel pissed that they've taken over the sidewalks and the streets. You feel a little bit scared because I'm driving through there. I got my wife in my car. I'm on high alert. I'm on my defense condition, my DEFCON is at the highest level. No. So it feels really weird now, and there's this bleed over. So I don't live in LA or near a big city. I live near a big city, but it bleeds over. Where we live is pretty idyllic. It's almost like that movie. I can't remember the name of it now. So, but it's like, it's weird where we are. The schools are great. The people are like, it's like normal. It's like, but I'm driving down the road the other day, and we've got big sidewalks. It's nicely landscaped, basically where we are everywhere. And there's this guy who's pitched a tent in the middle of the sidewalk.
Yes.
And this is not a normal homeless person. But the problem isn't, these people are homeless for whatever reason. It's not because they lost their job and they've fallen on hard times. People who are out in the streets because they're drug addicts, they're alcoholics, or they're mentally ill, or all of the above, right? But our laws about how we can deal with them they're really insane. I mean, they're disconnected from reality. You can't put somebody in a home for the mentally ill against their will unless they represent a clear threat to themselves or someone else. Yeah. Well, how are you going to pick that one out?
Actually, that's the same way as it is in Russia. But so far, it doesn't seem to be too much of a problem. But in fact, it doesn't really seem to be much of a problem at all. I think that was probably pretty good. But the other problem is that, but then again, in Russia, you don't see homeless camps. So there has to be something else happening. There has to be a different factor.
It's illegal to move. Yeah, sorry to interrupt. It's illegal to move them. They can't move them out. Somebody pitches a tent right next to the front door of Walmart. They can't be moved, or they won't be moved even if they could be. So these camps come up and they become permanent. And even not pretending to be an expert on the laws in this area, but as just sort of just a general consumer of the news and life, it's illegal. But even if it weren't, or where it isn't, there's literally not only no appetite to do anything by, for example, city councils, county boards of supervisors. There's an appetite to not do it. It makes no sense. And I think, the mental health issues don't exist in just the homeless, but they exist in the people who get elected to office because they're nuts.
Well, yeah, they seem to be very disconnected from reality, or they're building the reality that they like based on feelings, not so much based on practicality. So this is very interesting. One thing is it actually true? Is it actually true that if you steal something worth less than $1,000 in California, the store owner is not supposed to do anything about it?
So I can't remember what the number was, but it was raised. It was raised, I think, to $950. Maybe it's $1,000. I don't know. But it used to be. So the question is it a felony? What is your risk if you're a thief? What is your risk exposure to making a decision to go steal? right? And the higher you raise that number, that dollar value, the higher it goes to become a felony, the less risk exposure there is. So there's this really brazen attitude, and it has expressed itself in ways that I'm sure you've seen on television, even over there, maybe even especially over there, where you've got these mobs of young people, usually young, going into stores and just stealing stuff, or maybe just one guy, and he's doing it. He's being really like in your face. You can't stop me. So stores close down because it's not profitable or it's dangerous.
Well, I can tell you about over here. There's one thing that a lot of people in America are surprised about. Pretty much everything that's in the news in America, it makes it over here. Because I think a lot of times senators and stuff, they think they can just sort of like say whatever and that it's just sort of set into a vacuum. I don't know why. Russia tends to be very obsessive about like the West in America, so everything makes it over here, one way or another with translation. But anyways, Ted, I actually have to get going, and it looks like our Zoom conversation is going to be forced to close because I can't pay for Zoom anymore because of sanctions. So it was great talking to you, and I wish you the best of luck, man, because the problems you're describing are just, it's sad. It's really it's a man-made disaster, but it's a man-made disaster by very few men.
Well, keep us in your prayers that we can actually do something about it over here. We're trying. Some of us aren't giving up.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, man, and especially your
Thanks,
likes
brother.
and views. Anyways, guys, that was Ted, activist in California, trying to make it happen. So anyways, guys, if you enjoyed this video and you like the opinions coming out of my big fat mouth, then join up on my Telegram channel. That's Tim Kirby Hardcore on Telegram. Link, of course, in the description.